Good morning, good afternoon, you guys. We are in our third webinar. Thanks for joining us. How accurate is your color? So we're going to dive deep into color, but we only have an hour. So feel free to throw whatever questions you have in the chat. Interrupt me as much as you want. I'll kind of jump around, but I have sort of somewhat of a game plan, starting with color profiles, then some bit depth, and then we'll end with monitors and things like that. So there's a lot of things to cover, a little bit of Photoshop, and so many things to cover. So again, welcome guys. So let's get rolling. So yeah, feel free. Oh, and by the way, I am going to put a few links in here. So I would recommend that you either start a Word doc, a Google Doc, or some sort of way for you guys to get all of these links. Okay, so let me just go through this real quick. We'll talk about a few of them. The first one, again, coaching. If you guys have some deeper questions that are very specific or want some coaching on critiquing lighting, Photoshop, Lightroom, Capture One, pretty much any photographic program or anything that you guys want to talk shop about, monitors, cameras. I'm pretty good with Canon, Nikon, other cameras, but yeah, so we can talk about whatever you guys want to talk about one-on-one. There's the link. That's the first link. The next four, if you guys can subscribe to our Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, that would be awesome. Get all the updates and everything that we're posting. We're posting quite a bit these days. The next sort of grouping, how to calibrate your monitor. So we'll sort of dive into a little bit of that. We're not going to do a live calibration because it takes too long, but there are parts of the video that I'm going to pull in to stress a few points here and there. So watch that video. It's basically almost like a real-time how I reset the monitor. I use the hardware, use the software with Calibrite and a Color One display, and then use the correct ICC profile or ICM profile. And that is all in one video. So that's our YouTube link right there. Ordering calibration prints. I also did another video. It's on Facebook. So that is also in there. Check that out. If you haven't done your calibration prints, and I'll talk about that later, but that's a good video. Basically walk you through Easy Order, our Rose software, how to do that, and that's pretty cool. There's a few other links there about some sample prints, which you can download our Fuji test print, and this is how we calibrate all of our machines using this file. So we'll talk about that later, and also some other links to some hardware in there. So calibration software and also a daylight print viewer. So a few of those things, those are key, those three things. So anyway, those are the links. Anything you guys have in terms of questions, throw them in the chat or just interrupt me, please. And let's do this. All right. So Kelvin temperature. All right. Back in the days of film, it was 5,500. That's what I learned in school, right? 5,500 was your daylight, noon, balance, your basic daylight exposure, no clouds, right? That's BDE. Okay, so flashes are calibrated to be daylight. Some are different, and even shooting different cameras with the same light, you might end up with a different color temperature. I shoot with two different cameras, a Canon and a Hasselblad, and both of them are completely different. So if I'm shooting the same subject with two different cameras, my color temperature is going to change. My lights didn't change, nothing changed, but the sensor and the technology of that camera company gave me a different color balance when I go to balance it, even though the color temperature of the lights or the lighting, and I'm shooting in the studio, so nothing changed except for the camera. So take that into consideration. The Kelvin temperature, basically it's colder the higher it gets and warmer the smaller it gets, right? And these are numbers, there's a lot of discrepancy online. You'll find some people say daylight is 5,000, some people say daylight's 5,200, some people say fluorescence 4,000. And in your camera, you'll be able to see that kind of thing. So this is color temperature. So I'm going to pull up a couple files. All right, this is Canon. So this is your color space, right? So when you have color space, this is sRGB and Adobe RGB. Okay, so your color is going to shift when that changes, but I'm going to bring that back because we're going to talk about a couple of things that I just shot here. And this is, so we're in RAW. Okay, so this is a Nikon shot with a Canon. All right, so we're going to get back to our sRGB and our color profiles and all that stuff because it's very confusing. But let's deal with a color checker, which is this color checker. And you guys have a link to a color checker like this. So I shot this not in the correct color balance to basically prove a point, right? So in your camera setting, in your Nikon, whether you're in Canon or Nikon, you're going to have a white balance and you can set it to auto, but when you batch something, it might not be as smooth as if you had a specific temperature either from one of these, or you can set your Kelvin to a certain temperature, right? And Nikon actually gives you the option, which is pretty cool, to adjust. So it's not just 5200, you can do 5210, 5220. That kind of thing, or you can just shoot a gray card and get your color temperature that way. I shoot tethered, and maybe I'm a little different than some of you guys, but if I'm developing in camera raw, right, let's say I can come over here to this little picker, and even if you're in Photoshop or in Lightroom, and most of you guys know this, but just to be thorough, I'm going to come over here to this color checker, which is in my shot that I shot, right? So this color checker, before I changed it, let me just reset to default. As I shot it, I purposely made it 2500 really low, okay? And then I could literally, if I have a color checker in my shot, I could literally just come in here and that is a correct color balance. People say that the white square in these has the most information. Sometimes I pick this one or this one. As you can see, there's really not that much difference. Maybe a little bit in the tint, and I'm just here in this office, and technically these are daylight balanced lights, but it says it's 4700. So instead of believing the light manufacturer, I'll believe Photoshop and my little color picker on a color checker from Calibrate. Let's say I wanted to save this. I can save these settings, or I can create a preset, that kind of thing. Or I think I can just copy and paste maybe. Yeah, I just Control C, Control V, there they all are. Let's open them up. You don't have to open them as objects. Let's just open them as files and regular files. So we'll bring that in and then we'll start talking more about other stuff. But in Photoshop, cool thing you can do is not only, all right, I don't want to talk about that just yet. All right, let's say we're here. I should have probably left one that was bad. Well, I'll tell you what, I'll mess it up and then I'll fix it. So let's say that our color was something like that out of camera, right? And then how do we fix that? Well, here's the thing, right? I can come in here. I'm going to just bring my layers into here. So in Photoshop, if you don't go into Camera Raw, obviously you can go back in here to Adobe Camera Raw. Even if it's a JPEG, you can still come in here, pick on this and click that, and there's your correct balance again, right? Even if it's a JPEG, you can do that. It doesn't have to be raw. But there's an important part, which I'm leading into, bit depth. Okay. Another thing you can do, and this is just extra stuff, okay, and this is more complicated, and we're going to get into this, I believe, on March 14th, if I'm not, or May 14th, excuse me, May 14th, if I'm not mistaken, the blend modes and Photoshop and all this kind of stuff in terms of color. So if I want to adjust this color and I have a color picker, I can come over here to this picker and, well, theoretically, yeah, it doesn't work as well, but I can pick another spot around here like that. Probably Camera Raw is better in this case if I want to do something really quick. That would be the before and after. All right, so those are two different ways. Sometimes this works better, sometimes Camera Raw does. It's good to have options. All right, I know I'm going kind of fast. So this is going to be covered again in our Photoshop webinar coming up. Okay. Any questions so far? All right. Bit depth. Bit depth is quite an interesting thing because bit depth is the reason why we shoot in RAW, because it has a whole lot more information than an 8-bit JPEG. So JPEGs are always 8-bit. And I'll explain bit depth in a sec, and you guys will fully understand it because I think it's pretty cool. Basically, it's the amount of information that you have, because 8-bit to 16-bit, it's exponentially a lot smaller compared to 16, right? That's not only the reason why banding happens and all that kind of thing, but bit depth is very important to understand, I think. So always shoot in RAW. And if your camera has the option to shoot RAW and JPEG, because maybe you're shooting a wedding and the bride wants the small pics really fast and you don't have enough time to process 30 gigabytes, well, you have all the JPEGs, just expose properly, get those over to them, and problem solved. Then you still have the RAWs and you have all the information. You can fix that and make beautiful albums and that kind of thing. But quick, she wants to post something or whatever, there you go. So if your camera allows that, that's pretty cool. Okay, so RAW, this is Nikon, and this other one is same camera. It's just, this is just, I'm going into this menu right here. I clicked on that. So you have 12-bit, you have 14-bit option. I believe Canon just doesn't even, I might be wrong, but it might have that option. My camera does not, but other Canons possibly do. And the reason why this is important. Okay. Let's get rid of this. Let's move this up here. All right, bit depth. Bit depth. As we see, 1 bit, so 2 to the power of 1 is 2 shades of gray. All right. And there's a whole bunch of numbers in here, so I'm going to explain it. And I'm going to explain it actually with a calculator. Okay. So 2 to the power of 1, I'm going to just do 2 times 1 equals 2. 2 to the power of 2 times 2 is 4. Okay. Now, that's 2 bits, 4 shades of gray. So when we get to 8-bit, this is 3-bit, 4-bit, 5-bit, 6-bit, 7-bit, 8-bit. 8 bits equals 256 shades of whatever color you want. In this case, we're doing red, green, and blue. So 256 times 256 times 256 is 16.7 million colors. And you're like, well, we can only see, I have these little eyes here, we can only see up to 10 million colors. All right, so 10 million colors can be seen. We're already past that. So isn't 8-bit enough? You might ask yourself. And I might agree in some cases and I might disagree in some cases. It really depends on how far you push those pixels. And the reason why, the key reason why we shoot in RAW is because there is so much more information in a 16-bit file than in, or even 14-bit. 14-bit compared to 8-bit. And I'm just going to continue on going here. So here is 10-bit, and this is, or 9-bit, 10-bit, sorry. And if you look over here, 10-bit, you have 1024 shades, gives you 1 billion colors, right? So this is 13-bit, this is 14-bit. Now 14-bit, you can just see the difference right there. Or 12-bit, sorry, I went from 10 to 12, excuse me, I'm getting ahead of myself. This is now 13-bit, here's 14-bit, okay? So 14-bit, let's do this to the power of 3, which is each red, green, and blue. These are how many colors, possible colors in a 14-bit file. Now we had that option in Nikon to do 12-bit or 14-bit. You can see how a 12-bit RAW file is 68 billion colors, and this is 4 trillion. So a lot more. All right, let's keep going. Let's get to 256. All right, that was 8-bit. That's 9-bit, 10-bit, 11-bit, 12-bit, 13-bit, 14-bit. Okay, so 15-bit. In Photoshop, and the reason why this is important, and the cool thing about Lightroom is Lightroom has the capability to retouch in the RAW. So you're not changing it into 8-bit. So when you push the shadows and you push the contrast and you push the saturation, you have so many more colors. Like you had those 4 trillion that you had in your Nikon, 4 trillion colors as opposed to 16.7 million. Even though we can only see 10 million, when you really start pushing those pixels, that depth, that pixel depth, that color depth, that bit depth, all those words are synonymous. Like bit depth, color depth, pixel depth. It's the same thing, okay? That depth of color, it's basically having a crayon box full of 32,000 reds and 32,000 greens and 32,000 blues. You're going to be able to make smoother gradations in skies, in skin, in dresses, in flowers, in whatever you're shooting. So the more information you have, so don't get rid of that information is my point. And that's the cool thing about Lightroom is you're still in the raw. If you processed from another program, like let's say Capture One or Adobe Camera Raw, and you changed it into an 8-bit TIFF, and then you started retouching, well, you just lost a ton of information. So my recommendation, going from a RAW, stay in 16-bit and retouch in 16-bit because you're going to have a lot more information to then move those pixels around and have smoother gradation. So the main reason why you want to maintain those bits is for the editing process. Now, if you don't plan on editing, it doesn't matter. And we print in 8-bit. So the key thing is whenever you're doing any editing, stay in 16-bit. Whenever you're ready to print, change it into 8-bit. Okay. And that's literally just up here into image mode, 8-bit, 16-bit in Lightroom 2 in your export. That's where you'll do that. Okay, so this bit depth, that is bit depth. So it's a little on the technical side, but just to give you a full understanding of the importance of RAW, it's basically the amount of information is exponential. So
Eric, I have a question. I didn't quite understand. You know, I shoot in RAW 16-bit. If I'm did you say then that if I'm going to send these for prints that I need to change that into 8-bit before
yes,
I upload it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, our system won't take 16-bit, so you want to make sure they're in 8-bit. So, and the test that I've done too, an 8-bit quality 12 JPEG is identical to an 8-bit TIFF.
Okay.
Okay, for printing, you're not going to see a difference. I was unable to see the difference when we did some tests, and it's absolutely identical. So
what happens when I send you a 16-bit file?
it's going to error out in our system, so you're not going to be able to load it into. We're not going to be able to receive it, basically.
So is the software doing that for me automatically because I've never gotten an error of the files I've uploaded for printing? Did you consciously? I'm not consciously. I didn't know about changing it to 8-bit.
Okay. Did you change? Did you send us some stuff that?
Well, I did when I convert. Okay, so when I convert to from RAW or PS or PSB to JPEG, the JPEGs are 8-bit then, right? When I say
JPEGs, what? Sorry.
Okay, so when I do my edits and save off, I usually save off in Photoshop B. You told me to do that.
PSB, yeah.
Yeah, PSB. And then I'll save from there, I save to JPEG. And then I go to your website and upload those. But the JPEGs would be 8-bit, right?
JPEGs are always going to be 8-bit unless it's JPEG 2000. PNGs can be 16-bit too, but yeah, it's only going to be, yeah, JPEGs are only 8-bit, so you don't have to go through that extra step to change the bit depth. But if you send us TIFFs, and there's really honestly no reason to send a TIFF because a quality 12 JPEG uncompressed, highest quality possible, you will not notice a difference, and it's going to be a lot smaller when you go to upload it. So it's just, why not? Feel free to do whatever you want, send TIFFs or send JPEG. If you do send TIFFs, just make sure they're flattened and 8-bit.
Okay,
Okay.
I understand.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about color profiles. We print in sRGB, and that's basically the standard across the board in e-commerce. So anything online is going to be sRGB. If you send people files, you want that color profile to be in sRGB. Okay, and that's basically coming up here to the edit menu and convert to profile. Okay, and you can also go into these color settings. I'm in Photoshop, and Lightroom's the same. Just go into preferences, color settings, and when you export, make sure those color settings are sRGB. So I have my working space as sRGB. Now you can click these boxes. I have them unchecked. Had a conversation with someone yesterday. He always has them checked. So I find that unchecked works for me. He finds that checked works for him. There's not a right way, honestly. I feel he's right, I'm right, everyone's right. It's up to you. Whatever way you find helps. I use Bridge so I can see the color profile, and I know the color profile what it is, and then I import it into Photoshop and I go to convert the profile if I need to. This profile mismatch, if your working space is sRGB, you can have this checked. Ask when opening, ask when pasting, ask when opening or missing profile. So if it's not embedded, it might not have a profile in there. And so what do you want to do? Do you want to change it to the working profile? I say no. Some people say yes. And the reason is because I want to see that change and do that change for myself. And if there's anything to take from this course, from this webinar, is shoot in sRGB. We print in sRGB, so line up your workflow to be sRGB and you'll never have a color problem in terms of color shifts between profiles. So whether you check these boxes or not, just go make sure you're exporting in sRGB from Lightroom and you're shooting in camera sRGB and you're sending files to us in sRGB, and then you won't have, that's one variable less that you got to worry about. Now it's just a question of calibrating, making sure your color is accurate. So again, you can check these boxes or not, your call, but definitely I would say working space sRGB. Okay. Now, when you talk about color profiles, I just created this little Photoshop document. So CMYK is the smallest. ProPhoto is the largest. Okay, so what does that mean? That means that the colors that you see outside of the black, and you can see these corresponding colors next to the words, black, this little black shape is CMYK, okay? So that CMYK shape is a lot smaller than the gray triangle. I think we all agree, right? So we don't have to have a degree in geometry to sort this out, right? So ProPhoto is the largest color space. CMYK, and that's cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, is the smallest. We don't accept CMYK files, but if you want to see how it might change into CMYK, we can have that conversation one-on-one. I'm not going to get into that, but that's soft proofing and stuff like that. If we compare ProPhoto to Adobe 98, let me just turn the CMYK off. This Adobe 1998. So when I showed you that other file here, Canon, and this Canon gave me these two options, sRGB and Adobe RGB. Okay, RGB, Adobe RGB and Adobe RGB 98, or people just refer to it as 1998. That is this profile. It's pretty large. It's pretty common. A lot of monitors that are 10-bit, and something I failed to mention when I talked about bit depth, the majority of monitors are 8-bit. There are some higher end monitors that are 10 or 12-bit and possibly even a little more. And you'll see some smoother gradations in that. And nowadays there are monitors that say 99% Adobe RGB. And this is the profile that we're referring to because it's a larger color space. So Canon refers to color profile as color space. It's the same thing, okay? It's the same thing. But ICC and ICM are different compared to color profiles, and we'll get into that. And that's more monitor scanning printers, those profiles. So I'll talk about that, but I just wanted to introduce that right now. All right, so we'll talk about ICC, ICM in a sec, but gamut. So when someone says it's out of gamut, that means that the colors you see outside of these triangles aren't going to enter into the print. So when we talk about sRGB, it's smaller than ProPhoto. It's smaller than 1998, but it is the standard. It's e-commerce standard, anything on the internet. Your colors are going to be accurate if your color profile is sRGB. So anytime you send anyone a photo for them to post or a photo via email, I would say make sure you're in sRGB. But if you're starting in sRGB and ending in sRGB, it's already in sRGB, you don't have to worry about it. So again, one less variable. Right, and then we print, and the majority of printers, commercial printers, print in sRGB. So this is the color space of sRGB. So you might have some fluorescent blues or pinks or this green out here, and the only really one that can grab the majority of those is ProPhoto. But I don't know any lab that prints in ProPhoto, okay? But it is a larger color space, right? Now, when we dive into recuperating some colors that might be out of gamut, out of these triangles is what I'm referring to, then there are some tricks to do, and I can go over that one-on-one. I'm not going to get into that now, but if you see your color flattening, for instance, if you were in a different profile and you converted into sRGB, your colors might be a little flatter. And how do you recuperate that? That's something that we can dive into at a later date. But 256 and 256. And when you're in 16-bit, we have 32,768 in the red box. Okay, so 32,000 as opposed to 256. It's a lot more crayons in the red box and the green box and the blue box. So you have a lot more smoother gradations. The limitations of color, not gradations, are different. So sRGB is a smaller color space, so meaning that less colors compared to ProPhoto will enter, but the gradations within that color profile are going to be smoother with a higher bit depth. Does that make sense? It's two different things, kind of overlapping, kind of similar, but a little different. So Gabriel, hopefully I answered that question for you. So
Eric, can you hear me? This is Chris.
yeah, go ahead.
So you mentioned that McKenna and most of the labs print in sRGB. What do people who have high-end Canon printers in their home, what should they be doing for color spacing? Should they be using a broader color space than sRGB?
You certainly can. And so now that you bring that up, let's talk about some ICC and ICM profiles. Now, you can use ProPhoto, but you want to make sure your printer and your monitor are calibrated, and that is through some other hardware that you'd need to get in order to read the printout to then accurately calibrate those two. So I could send you links and we can meet one-on-one and I can talk to you about that. But yeah, certainly you can get a wider color because of that, but no commercial printer will get wider than sRGB. That's just the industry standard as it is currently. At home, you have to take some extra steps. Does that help answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, absolutely. So you can see how I just have a gray screen here. I use this gray screen, and the way I did it was something in Photoshop. Okay, so this, let me see if I can just pull this up here. This is the file I created. So I just literally created a new file and saved it as my desktop. Why? Because I want to see just pure gray. And if I went in here, I can go in, I'm at 126 red, green, and blue. I just went over here to this color picker. Okay, so 0 to 255, 0 is black. You see, these are red, green, blue channels here. 0 for red, 0 for green, 0 for blue. All of these are equal. Now, if I change one of these, it's gonna vary. But if I move this up, all of them are gonna be 255, 255, 255, equal parts. And then density-wise, 0 to 255, right in the middle is basically 127, right? So if I type in 120, And it should be really technically 127.5, 127.5, because that's half of 255, right? So that is middle gray. That's an 18% middle gray. So I created this file, just, you know, whatever my resolution, fill with this color, save it as a desktop, and that's my desktop. So every morning when I come into work, I see a pure gray. I don't have, you know, I'd love to see an ocean or, you know, a cute dog or something, but you know, I have middle gray. I'm boring, but you know what? I want I want color accuracy. All right. I'm here to get accuracy. So I don't want to see any shift, right? Okay. So after you calibrate, and I'm just gonna pull up and okay, you guys can see this now. This is a calibration video that we created, and this is just a ViewSonic monitor that comes up. Okay, please watch this video. It's pretty detailed in terms of that, and you can walk through. I basically reset the monitor to factory. I go through all of this. I use a calibrator. This is my ColorChecker display. I'm using this, and I go through using this software and set it up. So if you guys have any questions at all, this is a fairly detailed video, so just go through it all. And then you start reading all these patches. Okay, now when you calibrate a printer, you're also going to have, that thing's going to have to read all of these patches. So if I just hit play, it's a little sped up, but you're going to get all of these patches that are red, right? And it's saying that the true color that shows on your screen and the true color that it's able to read is the correct color, so that when you fine tune something for like 14 karat or 24 karat gold and you see a little shift, you're able to pinpoint that shift from this software, and your printer is going to have a printout of that. And once we get to the end here, this ICM profile, you see this right here. Okay, and I could pull up my system. This is my system here. I just calibrated this morning. Okay, and this, you can see two monitors. This is my second one. Second one is loading this profile. So I always date it with the year, the month, the day, and I write either right or left. And I know that the last date that I've calibrated is the one that is being loaded here. And this is just my, you know, system. I'm on a PC, system display. If you're on a Mac, system preferences, display preferences, you go in there. After you do this calibration, you can name it, and then you can actually save it and you'll see it. Okay, so what's the difference between ICC and ICM? Absolutely nothing. The only thing is ICC is International Color Consortium, made by Apple, and ICM is Image Color Management, and that's from Windows. Okay, so same exact thing, just if you see ICC, ICM, just know that that's synonymous. And what that is, those are color profiles for monitors, for projectors, for printers, for scanners. That's what those profiles are for. So apart from sRGB, camera profiles are different than ICM profiles in that sense. Okay, this is after you go through the calibration process, you save this, and that file will be in your system and it will load when you connect to that monitor. Okay, and you can do it as much as you'd like. I like to use the analogy of a car with oil, and the more you drive a car, the more often you're going to have to change that oil. Same thing with calibration. The more hours you log in on your computer, the more often you're going to have to calibrate. If you're on it 10, 12 hours a day, do it every week. You're not going to see much change. I calibrated this monitor and I hadn't been on it. I used another monitor. I had this unplugged. I calibrated this last month, actually. And the only difference, red, green, blue was across the board, green checks, everything was cool. But my brightness was 1 point off. The target was 120. It was 119. It was supposed to be 120. So I walk you through that process in here. I set it, this was actually the last profile that I had. I set it to this 120, 120. That was my target and that was my measured. So I had my calibrator on my screen. I got 120. A month later, I got 119. So what did I do today? I went into the monitor settings that you see on the bottom right here, and I just increased the brightness just a couple little clicks to get that 120 again. Okay, that was the only change in 1 month, but I hadn't been on this monitor much. If you're on it, you're going to see a little shift, and that's just the way it is. Okay, So that is basically monitor calibration, ICC. Now, calibration prints. So this is a print viewer, if you can see my print viewer here. So I have a print. Imagine you have a monitor next to this, and I do go over this in the other video, okay? And when you pull up, let's say this image, or maybe instead of this image, you have this, okay? And now, obviously, the color balance is off on this thing because I'm just using some little webcam that doesn't have correct color balance, but it is a daylight print viewer. And in the beginning, I sent one link in there for a print viewer. There's many different print viewers. The main thing is that they're daylight balanced. And if they're daylight balanced and you pull up the same image, which you can download, which I also sent you the link of, you can pull this image up on your screen. And if you have a daylight print viewer, you can view this print or one of your prints. If you do your calibration test prints, you can view one of your images under a daylight print viewer, also on your screen behind it, and you can fine tune in those monitor controls how I adjusted the brightness. You can go in and just maybe add a point of red or a point of green or a point of blue, and that calibrates to us. So this was a print from us. This is a luster print from us. The more you fine tune to that print, the better you'll be across the board when it comes to metals, gallery wraps, metallic paper, silk. And speaking of that, your question earlier, yes, metallic prints are different. They are higher saturated, higher contrast prints compared to lusters or silks. But the closer you get to this print, the more you'll be accurate across the board. So calibrate and then fine tune after. So order those calibration test prints. That link is in here and there's a video. So go ahead. It's totally free. It doesn't cost you guys anything. Even the shipping is free. So just keep a variety of whatever you shoot. If you shoot some outdoor, some indoor, throw in some outdoor and indoor, some dark ones, some bright ones, whatever it is, have variety of cornucopia, let's say, of images of 10 8x10 free luster prints. And then you can literally just pull it up here and then have your images on your screen and do that comparison and just fine tune. Maybe the skin tone just needs a hint of red and you'll start to see color better the more accurate you are. All right, we don't really need to talk about dynamic range, but I did.
I have a question, Eric.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you're talking about resolution on your screen and the brightness on your screen, I do calibrate my screen. However, I like working with my screen brighter. And in the display on a Mac, you can do a thing with color profile. You set the color profile and it, saves whatever you've done your profile to. And then there's a checkbox that says automatically adjust your brightness. Okay, I just noticed that on my screen just now. I just checked it and I didn't know that was available. So because I like working on a brighter screen, and then how do I know that when I'm sending things to you or when I'm doing the final edits, that they are correct color balance?
Right.
I'm not sure I asked that right question.
You mean for density, maybe?
Well, when you set up a Mac and I'm working on it and I have it calibrated, and I happen to notice here in the display options for Mac, you can adjust the brightness all the way up to the top. So I have it at maximum brightness. And then there's another box that says automatically adjust brightness to your color profile. So if I check, so I'm a little confused to make sure that what I see on my screen is what I'm sending to you.
Okay, so automatic brightness, I would turn that off because, okay, are you on a Mac laptop?
Desktop.
Okay, and then what's the monitor that you have? Is it like an iMac or is it like
an iMac? Yep.
Okay, so you're not going to be able to change the red, green, and blue. on that monitor. If you want to be more precise, and Macs are awesome, just by default, I've used Macs for years, and I found that the Mac display without calibration was actually better than calibrating it. But I would have an external monitor that would be calibrated. So my Mac monitor was kind of like a reference to what I thought was perfect on my perfect monitor, calibrated and whatever. Then before sending it to a client, I would view it on my Mac laptop, uncalibrated just from factory. And I would turn off that auto brightness because I don't want it to change unless I'm maybe out in the sun, then I need it brighter or something. But for color accuracy and for brightness accuracy, and really to the point of like, oh, my prints are too dark. Well, maybe your monitor is too bright and you're compensating. Right.
Mhm.
So when your monitor is too bright, you're thinking, oh, I want some deep blacks. So you're darkening, but actually the calibration is off because your starting point is already way too bright. So you're trying to get a good black and you're darkening, but actually it's already darker. You're just viewing it a lot brighter. Does that make sense? So
I do, that does make sense. On my monitor, I've never had any trouble sending prints to you before I calibrated it. I just got into calibrating about a year ago because somebody said I needed to do it. But I never on my Mac ever had problems with it
yeah.
until after I started calibrating.
Agreed. Yeah, and to my point, exactly. I think not calibrating a Mac is better
Mhm.
than calibrating a Mac, but if you have an external monitor that is able to be calibrated, then I would use that monitor as a secondary monitor and calibrate that, and that will be better than the Mac.
So how do I get my calibration thing back to factory settings? Do I just,
I'd have to see your specific case
right,
and that kind of thing, but yeah, we can certainly do that. I'm not sure how it came. It depends on the operating system and
right.
some
There's
variables, but
there's quite a list here where I can change it back.
okay.
So yeah.
Yeah, certainly there are options for that to do, definitely. Let me just double check. We're almost out of time, but I wanted to show you two other things. Let me just check this chat too. All right, we got some mention the word density. Please give me a working definition, what this is and why it matters and how I adjust it and what I want. Okay, so density is basically white. I'm talking gray tones, so white to black. And that's the short answer is a color aside, we're just talking about middle gray is that's middle density. Less density is more on the white side. More density is more on the dark side, right? 0 to 255 in all the ranges. Ansel Adams did a lot of work on that. And digital zone system, I've studied a lot about that, and I can go real deep into all that stuff. And we might actually do another webinar. And if you guys really want to get techie in terms of like digital zone system, I can certainly talk shop on that. But density, yeah, that's just grays, different levels of grays. All right, so I'm gonna share my screen. Let's do a couple things in Photoshop. I was asked, and we're just gonna dive into the Q&A and I'll show you a couple things while we're doing this. What's the correct way of doing black and white? This is how I do it. Maybe there's different ways of doing it, but when I do a black and white, I use this little area down here, and this helps me be non-destructive. Okay, and then this color mode, and I'll get into this in the other Photoshop webinar coming up May 14th. And then I come into properties and I just reduce saturation. So I put it into color mode. It would change if I had this into normal mode. and I could bring up the history probably. Here's my history. Blending, change, modify. See the difference between normal and color? That's just changing that right there. Okay, so just doing this simple thing of creating a hue and saturation adjustment curve, that's this little semicircle here. Just by creating that and having that in normal isn't enough. So I always put it into color because that I'm only changing the color and then I reduce the saturation. That's still in RGB and I don't change it into grayscale or anything. It's 8-bit. All right,
So going into adjustments and clicking on black and white is not going to be the same as what you're doing right now.
You mean going into
Image, and then going to image, adjust
image adjustments and then black and white?
Black and white. Yep. Can you do that?
You can, but it's destructive.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so you can certainly mess with all this, but then you're left. So unless you duplicate this layer, let's say I duplicate that layer, then you go into image adjustment and then black and white. Sure, you can do it that way and start messing with stuff. I would say do it this way. You have the same thing here, black and white,
Oh, okay.
and then put this into color. And then you have all your adjustments here. And then you don't need these 2 layers because creating an extra layer creates more file size. So you have this and you can just turn off that layer and it's non-destructive. That's, in my opinion, that's how I work. Different people do different things. But if it were me, I would, I'd like to just change this. And maybe the sweet spot of something is maybe reducing the opacity of that. Maybe you don't want a full black and white, maybe you do. If you do, just keep it at 100, but you can certainly change that. So that's black and white. Remember, in terms of color, and just I'll end on this point, when you change color, you want to understand how and why this works. Okay, know the opposite. So if you're trying to fix this photo and you go into curves to change something, if you increase the red, you're decreasing cyan, right? If I just turn this off and get back there, cyan and red are complementary or opposites. Magenta, which isn't technically a color, is the opposite of green, but it is for our case in digital. So cyan and magenta are opposites, or cyan and red are opposites. Magenta and green are opposites, and yellow and blue are opposites. So if you wanted to adjust this, I never use the color balance thing. I just have it up to, it's a visual thing for you guys to see. But if I want to change color, I would probably be in I would create a curve. I went to this adjustment, I created a curve. I'm in here, I want to adjust the color, so the blend mode, I change the color, and then I can go into each individual channels. So, okay, so if I increase green, I'm decreasing magenta. If I decrease green, I'm increasing magenta. Just think of it that way. So if you know your color wheel, your light color wheel, not your paint color wheel, is this, right? So you can go in and you can change all of these things. Increase blue decreases yellow, decrease blue increases yellow, right? So just that is basically the color balance, and you can just see it right here. Okay, I never use the color balance. This one, I think it's a lot more complicated, but I always use the curves. Okay, so that's where we're at. That was a lot of information. So kind of a fire hose. We talk bit depth, we talk color profiles, we talk ICC, we talk monitor calibration, we talk calibration test prints, daylight print viewers, complementary colors. Is there anything, what else? There's probably something in the chat, but feel free to ask away. What else? Is there any doubts? And obviously within 1 hour, we can't, have a master degree in color, but did I confuse you more? Did I solve some problems? Are there some looming doubts out there? What are you guys thinking?
Well, that was helpful, and I have some prints that I want to do in black and white that I shot some portraits on, and I think we'll cover that in more detail when we do a one-on-one.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, happy to, Paul. Anytime.
I have one last question, Eric.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Sure.
What is the hex code for 18% gray? The letters. I work off of that. I
Okay.
don't know. It's kind of weird.
So
but
yeah, I
it's
just clicked on this little box here on the left. I'll do
Right.
it, did it fast, right? You just I clicked on that little box. I go pretty much right around
what are
120.
the letters or
Yeah,
oh,
sure. 127, 127, 127. There it is. 7-1. I'll just put this in the chat. This
717.
is there. I just put it in the chat. That's
Oh, 71.
7F, 7F, 7F. So
Got it.
combination of 6 letters. Yeah. So if you work with hex codes, yeah, that is.
Oh, that's super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, but I mean, you could just come here, just drag it over to the side, and then just, and sometimes you get lucky, or just type it in 127. Just make sure, red, green, blue, all 127. Don't worry about CMYK. It's just going to be whatever this is. Just go with RGB.
Very good. Thank
One
you.
last thing though, because so I've been using Photoshop for many years, and when I first started, this is back in the 90s, right? So yes, I'm about that age. So when I thought it would be better to retouch in CMYK, and the reason why I was told, and I don't know how accurate this is, but I've always retouched in RGB ever since then, was because CMYK has a lot more information. Well, you're limiting the colors for one, but you're also creating a larger file size because you have 4 channels instead of 3. So I don't know if anyone wondered that, but early on in my career, I didn't know why you should do, why should it be this, why should it be that? And this is early in the 90s when we didn't know what we know now. But yeah, you always want to have your file sizes the smallest they can be. And these adjustment layers don't really add much, but once you start adding pixels and, come in here and start, duplicating this whole thing, your file size is just going to be nuts. So try to really limit this to 1 or 2, and I'll get into this at a later date. Yeah, is there a relationship between density and white balance? So relationship between density and white balance. Well, yes, there is, and maybe I know what you mean. If you don't have a pure white, okay, say you have a shift on this photo, right? Say you didn't use a color checker and this photo is a little off. Let's say it's like that, right? And this is a little off. So your whites, if we took a white from the eye, if we had a color checker, that is, you have a dominant, maybe on the red or orange kind of side, right? So you're lacking cyan, right? Basically, density, if you follow this across, you would want this to be over there so that you don't have any dominant, meaning like this has a red dominant. So you don't want to have any dominant. You want your white balance to be pure, right? And that's why these color checkers are great, because the color checkers are really accurate. You can do something from a piece of paper if you forgot your color checker, for instance, but it'll be a little different. Paper might be a little blue, might be a little yellow, might be a little green, might be a little red. It's going to be better than nothing. But that's why color checkers are important. Anything that I didn't get to that you guys feel free to slow it down. I know there was a lot in here, but if there's any looming questions, then yeah, sign up for the one-on-one. It's an awesome opportunity. They're totally free to you guys. We'll dive into whatever you want, and happy to really just go deep into megapixels or lighting or whatever you guys want. And hope to see you guys soon. So thanks again. All right, guys.